But when we go in, and one of the things I want to get to today, Jim, as well, and I think Olivia's going to be grabbing questions. So if you put the questions into the question box, because we'll have we'll have half an hour of questions at the end, because I can see leaders from all over the world coming in, and the piece we often get to, we come and do the days and we do targeted programs, but we get questions all the time. Like, so one, the horoscope piece. Okay, it's a horoscope. You fill it in, and those components come out. How do you respond to pieces like this? Because we know how we clearly respond, but I'm really interested, as the head of the strengths community worldwide, when you get challenged around the validity of strengths or the approach to strengths, what's your response?
Yeah, it depends. You got to ask a few questions of, you mentioned horoscope is just one of those things. The other thing we hear is a lot of times like, oh, this is my employer trying to fire me, or this is my employer, trying to find some negative things about me. Right. And so it kind of depends on how that comes in. This is why like coaching is so important as we think about this movement, because that is an open door for a conversation, right? For an individual. I always try to get, when we get that response, or when I'm working with coaches, I always try to get to the motivation behind that question to start with. It almost always has some kind of negative experience for the individual in their background. It was used against them at some point in time, or they had a bad experience with something. The other one, Mick, we get a lot of skepticism on the data. They're skeptical that we can kind of come up with these results. What we find most of the time in the conversation that happens then after that, tell me a little bit about how you're feeling about that, or why, or the reasons you're skeptical, or why do you think it's a horoscope? We begin to get to those motivations, and then in almost every case, and when the coach, or even in the cases when I get to do it, and I don't get to do it as often as I used to. I don't get to talk with those. I used to get those a lot more often. I don't as much lately. But after asking the why, then begin to ask the questions about, well, okay, let's just take a second. Tell me what you think about what it actually said, right? What's in there? What's in the report that you saw? And respond to it, right? Strengths always is best used in the context of a relationship, right? Between a coach and a coachee, or between a manager and employee, or between friends, right? Coworkers, whatever, right? I think in that context of another human being is where it really, really gets powerful. And so, Mick, in most of the cases I've been a part of, is we begin to have that discussion around, okay, let's just set that aside for a second. I mean, we've got the technical report for those that are super skeptical from a data perspective. They can go through and read the validations and all the work we did on that and some of those kinds of things. For the horoscope, we always say, well, we've had 28 million people do this. It's a little more than just a horoscope. And I have all these examples of things that we've done on Call to Coach with people where it's actually changed the performance. So we've got plenty of evidence from that perspective. When we tie it to our engagement numbers, right? I mean, we've had 90 million some respondents into our engagement index. And when we tie that to organizations that are using strengths, we see results. Okay, so it's a little beyond a horoscope at that point. That makes sense. But then when we get the individual talking about their own condition, their own strengths, and we say, well, so we've got this, for me, number one is a ranger. We've got this arranger theme. How have I seen it successful in the past, right? And we ask that. I like to ask that question of the individual, and in almost all cases, that begins to break down the barriers, right? Because no one's really wrong about themselves. That's the key, right? They know themselves better than anybody, and so we can begin to make it effective from a personal standpoint, as opposed to superimposing a system. I think this is why, recently we've kind of changed our stance on, we used to produce all these global reports based on top 5 of countries, right? Top 5 in languages, top 5 by generation. We stopped producing those because what we just found is people were just taking those and using them as a comparison. Oh, how do you compare to the top 5 of the country you live in? Well, it's not about how you compare to your country. It's about how you compare to yourself, right? It's about how you take these themes and make them successful for you. And so, Mick, I think the key is, instead of going, a lot of times we get this top 5 and we want to go up and compare ourselves. And that's a human condition. We all want to do that. But I think we got to take it and drill down on ourselves and ask those questions like, okay, what does this mean for me? And what historical context can I bring in from my own past performance to see how does this work? Mick, the other objection we get is, well, like, especially in the insight report, right? The one that's kind of customized to you, they'll be like, well, that statement's wrong. Okay, cross it out. Like, well, listen, we're not magic. It's not magic. It's an attempt for us to make some really, really, really educated thoughts and guesses on you. Okay, if you don't see that as right, what is? Tell me what is in this, to have that coaching conversation. So I think it always needs to lead to, and it's an open door to a great coaching conversation for an individual.
Yeah, and I love that, Jim. So one of the things that we say constantly is mine it for gold, because we'll get that as well, where people will say, oh, that's not me. And we'll say, great, let go of it. Tell me what is you, and think about it as a place. What creates value for you in this document? What's the value in this for you? Not, oh, that's not me. Fantastic. Well, we can let go of that really, really quickly and focus on what is you, but also weaponizing your strengths to point them at the things that really matter to you around. This is how I create value. And so the other piece we get a bit is, you're labeling me, and actually it couldn't be further from the truth, because if we know, and I'm interested in you talking a bit about this as well, because we know the statistic that your top 5 strengths, in the order that you have them in, 1 in 33 million people have them. And that piece is, of course, they're only your strengths if you're using them, if you're finding ways to bring them to productive use. So how do you respond to this is a label? Because we're really conscious that it's not, we're not looking to label you in any way. We're looking to set you free so that you can use your strengths in the way that you want to use them. But how do you respond to that?
Mick, just rephrase that question for me specifically. How do I answer that? Rephrase that question for me.
Yeah. So when people come towards you and say, "Oh, you've labelled me with these strengths," yeah. How do you respond to the idea of, this is a label that we're trying to squeeze you into some sort of box of saying this is who you are?
Yeah, this is a particularly tough one, because generally someone who comes back with a labeling has been hurt with this in the past. And trust has to be deployed at this point. They've got to trust you to say, hey, look, and then the situation around it matters too. How is it being deployed? Why was it being deployed in an organization or individual? In most cases, when an individual takes it, they take it because they wanted to take it, so they're more open to it. I see this in Twitter, because I monitor our Twitter account, and almost at least once a week, maybe more, someone says, oh, great, I've been forced to take the strengths finder at work, right? I see this as feedback in Twitter. Oh, joy, this is going to be awesome. And you just sense the sarcasm oozing out of Twitter right at that point. And so again, we go back to the relationship of, okay, so why do you feel that way, or what has happened in the past to do that? And then to have this conversation again, to get them to respond to some of these things. So, okay, let's just look at what you got there. Just respond honestly. This is what I do. Just respond honestly to me on how you feel about what you saw in the results. And let's have this conversation. In almost every case, and I've heard this from a lot of coaches too, by the end of the conversation, as they've talked through it and they begin to trust you, and you're not going to use it against them, right? And by the way, if you're in organizations where you're doing this, stop doing it. Don't use the stuff against them, right? In almost all cases, they come around, right? We begin to get them to talk about themselves. The key to this is not, and I see a lot of coaches doing this, don't read this, don't read it to them, don't tell them who they are. Let them read it and let them tell you who they are through the context of it. There's too much of a tendency for coaches to want to truth tell, is kind of what I call it. They get the report, they sit in front of someone and they're like, okay, because I'm a coach, let me tell you how you are based on your top 5. And I really think that conversation's got to start with the individual. So Mick, I think if you're truth telling, that could lead to the skepticism about these. So if you're doing that, stop doing it. Let them react to the report.
Yeah, and it is opening up the uniqueness of them, isn't it? It's sincerely about opening that up. So